Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to paint Iron Warriors for the Horus Heresy. There's tons of awesome techniques and tips in this video for painting any style of metallic armor scheme, so let's get straight into the painting. And these are all of the paints that you'll need to follow along with this tutorial. To prepare the model, I've primed it with a coat of matte black spray from the Colour Forge, and you'll see later on in the video that some of these components are just tacked in place for now to make it easier to paint them later on. Our first step is to base coat the entire miniature with lead belcher from Citadel. I'm using an airbrush to apply this, however, if you don't have access to an airbrush, you could easily use the lead belcher spray can instead. Alternatively, you could also base coat the entire miniature by brush, you just have to take your time when applying all of the layers to get a nice smooth finish. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some of these components were just tacked in place to make it easier to paint them, and you can see here that I'm removing the shoulder pads so that we can paint those separately. And while we still have the airbrush out, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to start painting the hazard stripes next, starting with an all-over base coat of Averland Sunset from Citadel. Now, if you don't have access to an airbrush, you can learn how to paint these hazard stripes freehand in the extended version of this video tutorial, which is available exclusively on our Patreon page. And over there, you'll gain access to all of our video tutorials in extended form, showing you how to paint every single color and every single detail from start to finish. Most of the videos are well over an hour long, and they show you far more in depth all of the techniques and tips on how to paint box art style miniatures, and you'll also gain access to a whole bunch of other benefits over there as well for just the price of a few pots of paint. The link to check it out is in the description of this video. Next, to mask off the stripes, I'm using some 2mm masking tape from Tamiya. And now that all of our stripes are masked off, I'm airbrushing a layer over the top of Abaddon Black. When spraying directly over the top of any stencil or masking tape, it's more important than ever to apply thin layers. If too much paint builds up on the surface, that's a prime opportunity for it to seep under the tape and create some bleed on the edge. So build this up over nice thin coats gradually. And once we've allowed it some time to dry fully, we've got the very satisfying job of removing all of the masking tape. And our next step is to go around and paint anything that we do not want to be the hazard stripes with Abaddon Black, all the way around the edges of the trim, making sure to paint the 90-degree inner surface as well, where it meets the panel, and any other details which we want to be another colour later on. And now we're going to extend that onto the rest of the body as well, going in with that Abaddon Black to base coat any details which we later want to be any other colour other than the lead belcher. Now we're going to start blocking in our accent colour of metallic, which is Runelord Brass, focusing mostly on the trim. It's going to take multiple thin coats to build up full opacity, so be patient with it and just focus on getting the smoothest paint finish possible. Next, using lead belcher, I'm going to paint over some of the areas which were sprayed over earlier on and reinstating that silver colour. Next, we're moving on to one of my favourite steps, which is adding all of the glazing and shading onto the model. And to do that, I've got some Rhinox hide on my wet palette, which I'm thinning down with a lot of water and a small amount of glaze medium. This should give you a very thin and translucent paint, which acts almost like a wash, but with a lot more control. When applying this, the goal is to be very directional with your brush strokes and very deliberate into where you are pushing the pigment. To develop a nice smooth transition, we need to always be working the brush strokes towards where we want the darkest areas to be. And remember that this paint is very translucent and thin, so it's going to take many passes to build up that colour, but that's what's going to give us that really smooth transition and a nice clean result without any staining. Next, I'm going to add some Abaddon Black into that previous glaze mix to darken it down slightly. I'm then going to make a few passes on the model, focusing predominantly in the darkest areas just to add an extra layer of depth. Try to keep within the boundaries of the previous stage so that you've got the smoothest transition possible. Next, I'm going to thin down some Abaddon Black heavily with water and a tiny little bit of glaze medium. The goal here is to essentially create a wash. However, because we're thinning down an acrylic paint, we're going to have a little bit more control over how it behaves, and we've got a lot more pigment density. I'm concentrating this on some of the deepest grooves and darkest recesses on the silver panels, predominantly around any of the working metals, hinges, and things like that. And now we're going to start really bringing it all together with some shading of the brass. And to do that, I'm using Agrax Earthshade, which I've thinned down slightly onto my wet palette. All of this shading on the brass we're going to be building up in multiple thin passes once each layer has fully dried. That colour isn't going to develop immediately right away, but that's how we're going to get that really nice and smooth transition and tons of additional contrast. Now it's time to edge highlight all of our metallics. And to do that, we're first going to start with the silver with an edge highlight of Rune Fang Steel. To highlight the brass, I've made a 1-to-1 mix of Stormhost Silver and Canoptech Alloy. I like this mix because it gives you just a little bit more punch than the Canoptech alloy gives you on its own, and we get a really nice crisp edge highlight, with still a little bit of that tint of the brass colour. Next, we're going to edge highlight our black panels, and our first stage here is Corvus Black. Unlike the previous layers, I'm actually painting this a little bit wider than the thinnest edge highlights that I'm capable of painting. In the Eavy Metal style of painting, this is what's typically referred to as a chunky highlight, and what that means is that later on we're going to be painting a thinner edge highlight within this step. If this is something that's a little bit unfamiliar to you, then I highly recommend that you check out some of our Space Marine painting tutorials on our channel. We're now going to be painting a thin edge highlight within the width of that previous step using Dawnstone. This is where you really need to refine your brush skill and paint as sharply as possible to not only create a nice consistent thin line, but also leaving behind some of that previous step of Corvus Black. Next, using Administratum Grey, I'm painting on top of that previous step in some of the brightest and sharpest corners, just to bring those out even further and create more contrast. This shouldn't run along the entire edge, just a small portion towards some of those sharper edges. And to finish it off, I'm adding a small dot of white to the apex of all of those corners. This is quite a subtle step, but when applied to all of the corners, really adds a lot of extra contrast and shine. And now we have the very satisfying step of going around and picking out all of the rivets on the flat armor panels. And to do that, I'm using Iron Hands steel and a small and sharp brush. Next, we have one of my favorite stages, and that is all of the weathering. What I'm doing here is creating some small chipping and scratches to all of the hazard stripes using Abaddon Black. I'm trying to be fairly random with my brush strokes here and just concentrating on some of the edges of each of these stripes. I chose not to damage any of the other panels, however you can see how I would pull that off using our Salamanders tutorial on the channel, where I show you in detail how to create some chipping and scratching effects on power armor. And that's our Iron Warriors Saturnine Terminator complete. A massive thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I hope that you found all of the techniques and tips useful for painting your own Iron Warriors Saturnine Terminators. Remember that you can find the extended version of this video, including all of the other colours on the miniature and the techniques for painting them, over on our Patreon page. And over there you'll also gain access to our back catalogue of all of our extended masterclass video tutorials, as well as a whole bunch of other PDF tutorials and some other great content too. The link for all of that is in the description down below, but otherwise a massive thank you for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video.